Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of My Veterinary Life podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Marcy Kirk. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm joined by our other co-host, Dr. Annie Chavant.
Hello, everyone. My pronouns are also she, her, hers.
And we are wrapping up our mini series talking about the Journey for Teams Educational Sharpenings. And if you are like, I have no idea what you're talking about, go back and listen to the first two episodes. They are jam packed with some great information. But if you're like, nope, I'm committed to this episode, don't worry, we'll get you caught up. We have two amazing guests that are joining us for the third time in this series. It's not the third time on the show. So we're going to be joined by AVMA's Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer, Dr. Latonia Craig, and AVMA's Director of Member Wellbeing and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Initiatives, Dr. Jen Brandt. And they're going to share with us the final two iterations of educational sharpenings, how they apply to us, what they are, how we can incorporate them, so much more. We've got a lot to cover. So before we jump in, we do want to remind everyone that this episode is brought to you with support from our educational partner, IDEX, whose diagnostic and software solutions create clarity in the complex, constantly evolving world of veterinary medicine, and you can learn more at IDEX.com. With that, welcome back, Dr. Craig and Dr. Brandt.
Thank you.
So we are thrilled to be talking about this and introducing and kind of teasing out what the next 6 months are going to look like for some initiatives at the AVMA. And in the first episode, we kind of talked about the umbrella initiative, which is Journey for Teams, and what that is, what it looks like. That's where these educational sharpenings are going to live. And in the second episode, we sort of talked about larger initiatives in the DEI and well-being space. And I thought today we might kick off before we jump into the specific topic for the educational sharpenings. If people are like, yeah, I'm in, I'm excited about this, I want to bring this to my organization, I want to bring this to my clinic, I don't know how. How are other people doing this? How do I get started? What can I do? I was wondering if maybe we could kick things off with what you've heard from other people of how this is being implemented. So I wanted to throw that to you, Dr. Craig, to kick things off.
No, absolutely. So it has been implemented in different ways. There are those individuals that are going about this on their own, because you can do this as an individual, but we really do encourage you to do it as a team because we designed it for that purpose. And so for teams, there have been individuals that have implemented this in their monthly staff meetings. Some folks meet more often than that. And what I have found for the ones that have been who've incorporated it in their staff meeting, one, it gives them another opportunity to communicate with their staff, touch base with them, and beyond what's going on in the day-to-day of their practice in their workplace. But it gets them a chance to connect and build relationships with their colleagues better, because these are some really deep conversations, and it does give an opportunity for folks to ask some of those hard questions that they may not have been able to ask or reflect on before. I have seen, not only have I seen the implementation of it in the staff meetings, our own board, AVMA board, they are doing Journey for Teams. They do a module at every board meeting, and they have a conversation around it. And then they also have a navigator, and the navigator is someone that they've identified that can help facilitate and lead that discussion. Actually, Dr. Jennifer Kwame on the board is helping to facilitate that discussion. The program is not designed for you to become a DEI expert, but it does, what it is responsible for doing is helping you to dive into the conversation, help to facilitate, learn more of how to do that perspective taking that we are introducing, in this set of educational sharpening skills. But some other things that I can also tell you that have come out of this, I have seen people reflect on their recruitment plans. How do we recruit? Where do we recruit? How do we engage with our community by building pathway programs? How do we ensure that our practices are fair and equitable? Doing some policy reviews about what's allowed, what's not in our policy, to make sure that we are staying current with the needs of our employees and our people. How do we make sure that we're asking questions to put a pulse on what's happening in the day-to-day? Are people happy? How can we build those conversations within, our one-on-ones that we have? And so that's some of the things that people have done. And then I can also tell you that specialty colleges like AAEP have implemented JFT as a part of their strategy, where they're rolling out JFT in 8 of their practices. We also have quite a few schools that have built it in their onboarding process. Iowa State has ongoing conversations with Journey for Teams. Then there's folks that do things in the afternoon to connect as well. And then we've just got a lot of supporters in industry that are also involved in this process too, that have made it a part of their team communication practices too.
Those are some great examples. And I know for me, it's always helpful to hear some examples of things that I can do right as a next step, and then things that other people are doing in kind of creative ways that might help me apply that to my situation too. And so, and I think you also had that great point about how Journey for Teams can be the spark of that conversation for conversations that you probably wanted to have with your staff anyway, right? Making better connections, getting to know them better, kind of talking about these difficult topics. So it's nice to be able to have some tools and some resources created by subject matter experts to just kind of kick off those conversations that you might have been wanting to have for a little while anyway. So I think that our next educational sharpening that we're going to be talking about might be one of those topics of things that people have maybe wondered what this might look like, or how they might be able to take on this role in their practice. And that is the role of an upstander. So this is a sort of unique term. So I would love, Dr. Craig, if you can tell us specifically what an upstander is, and then we'll kind of dig into what that sharpening might look like.
Oh, sure. So upstander, and you might have heard the word bystander, but we're really trying to shift to upstander, because when you think about bystander, they sit and they stand by and they watch, and we don't want that, right? We want folks to move away from being a bystander into an active role of being an upstander. So this is somebody who takes some sort of action to support the individual or individuals that are being targeted or have experienced harm by someone else. And so they actively do something to show their level of support. Now, in our educational module, we focus on the 5 Ds. And the 5 Ds are all steps that one can take at any given moment, regardless of the situation. And so the first one, and I may say these out of order, and these are not linear. Okay, so you can do these out of order, but I'm gonna start with the one that is consistent amongst all of them. Document is one of them. So if there is something that is happening in a workspace, you can always document, and you should always document. Okay, that should be a part of everything that you do, so that someone knows what exactly happened, what time did it happen, who was involved, who was there, what was the response. Document is always one that should be there. The other one is direct. How can you, if you see it, how can you show up immediately and respond? Whether you say something to the person that is causing harm, how can you interrupt it so it doesn't cause further harm? Another one is distract. If there is someone that is speaking to someone in a negative manner and you want to remove that person from the situation, you might go over and say, hey, there's something that I need you to look at. Can you come over here and look at this? That allows for there to be time and space, and it gives that other person the ability to calm down. Another one is delegate. Perhaps because of your position, you may not feel that you're the best person to show up because your level of authority, or you think someone else would be the better person because of the role that they play or because of the position they have. You might go and get someone else and say, hey, this is what I've noticed. Do you think you can go over and calm Miss Kirk down, because she's upset at what's being said to her about her particular pet? Or do you think that you can pull this individual in another room? So you're going to get someone else to help you in the situation, or you're giving it to someone else to handle because you may not be the right person. Delay is another one. And so there are times when you could be, a colleague may have said something to you, and or you've heard it, or you've seen it, or it's said to you, whatever the situation is. Sometimes that moment, responding in that moment, may not be the best moment, right? And so sometimes that might mean, let me cool off because I am upset and I'm not going to come to this conversation where I have done my own regulation. So I might have to cool off a bit and then come back to you and then bring this to your attention. Or it might even be, this isn't the right time because we have an emergency in this hospital room and we can't address this right now, but it's certainly important. I have to come back to it. So you might delay it to have a better, it puts you in better positions for both parties to be heard, and for you to take some reflection around the word choices that you want to use so that it doesn't cause further harm. And then document, of course, is what's in all parts of any scenario that you can do. And so those are the 5 Ds: distract, direct, delegate, delay, document. And so finding ways to activate those so that you can be an upstander and show up for support for your colleagues. And I think it's important to learn how to be that for people, because you certainly are going to be, there's going to be a time when you need to be that for people, but there's going to be times when you need people to be that for you.
I really like this. I love whenever there's like a tangible, I can count these things and I can see where it sort of helps in the workplace. Well, in any relationship, we're going to focus on the workplace because we're a career podcast, but sort of building that trust and safety on the team. I also love that if you've been with us for all the episodes in this mini series, you can see how this is building. It's and you can do these in any order, right? You don't have to do them but if you do them in the release order, the self-awareness to know that, oh, I might not be in the place to handle this right now, or this may not be the time, can really help. The reactivity, I'm just going to bring that one up because I said in that episode, it's my favorite, but this is really good and very applicable. So just to kind of maybe really emphasize that point, Jen, do you have like an example that you might be able to give us of how this could be applied in maybe a veterinary workplace?
Yeah, I will say sometimes when people hear Upstander, it feels really scary because our assumption is doing anything has to be big, right? Mm-hmm. And like Latonia covered, there are all different kind of steps that we can take. And sometimes it's about fine tuning it for that particular moment. So a common example we might have is where we may be interacting with colleagues and then we hear one makes a really derogatory comment in some capacity about someone else. One, we can check in, like, do we tend to just avoid any confrontation at all? Do we tend to laugh and agree? Like, we want to move away from that to having some moment where we address it. And it could be as simple as the distraction technique, like, hey, I heard you're going on vacation and I'd like to hear about it so that you can move the conversation a different direction. And sometimes it really is the most appropriate, most beneficial thing that you can do to speak up and say, I'm really uncomfortable with that kind of language and I'm going to disconnect from this conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you kind of highlighting that distraction and an example of that, because I don't know, I feel like for me, when I first hear this word upstander, I kind of force myself to think about it a little bit. I'm thinking of the direct D is the one that comes to mind first, and maybe the only one that comes to mind is like, if I'm going to be an upstander, like that's a very active word, right? I've got to be the one that's going to be making that intervention. I've got to know the exact right thing to say. I've got to feel empowered to do that, and the reality is that might not be the case in every situation. And there's 4 other Ds that we can learn about in this educational sharpening to be flexible and adaptable to what the specific needs of that situation are, is what I'm gathering from the sort of initial explanation in that specific example. So thank you for helping me piece those kind of facets of what an upstander is together.
Yeah, I will also say, we tend to do of the 5 Ds. We have one that we tend to gravitate towards more than others, and so being aware of that. If there is, if you know that you're one that always delegates because you never want to get involved, I mean, there's something to be said there. Why is that? And it's not saying that there's anything wrong with it, but sometimes we have to be uncomfortable in our response, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It's not going to be comfortable all the time. And I think that's a good takeaway from this, is to push yourself to do something different, to show up for people differently. If we are ever going to get to a place where we're trying to foster a sense of belonging in the workplace, these kinds of actions have to happen where we show up for people. We hear it all the time. Okay, now do we do things all the time? Maybe, maybe not. And if we don't, if we don't do something, then that's the reason why we see individuals that may not be happy in the workplace because they don't feel like people are showing up for them or supporting them. And this is how we really get to the meat of what's happening in the day to day and start changing a workplace culture. These things they're not just nice things to do. They are absolutely critical to fostering the sense of belonging.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for underscoring kind of the importance and kind of the critical nature of this one. I feel like this sharpening in particular is one, maybe especially with the frameworks too. It's like we can learn about them and we can understand what the D's are, but then it seems like what we're really trying to do with the sharpening is like, then what's the next step? How are we actually going to like live them out? So maybe Dr. Craig, can you tell us like how this sharpening will help us move from acknowledgement to action?
Absolutely. So when you have, I think what I love about this module is it will give you a scenario and it will show you how the 5Ds are operationalized. And so what does it look like to be direct in this situation? What does it look like to delay? What does it look like to document? What does it look like? Well, in the document, we don't really go heavily into because we all know how to document, but it does take you through those Ds of what it looks like. And then there's an opportunity to give you a scenario, and then you write out what direct looks like for you in that situation, what delegate looks like for you in that situation, because you might do it a little different, and it still fall under that sort of category. And that's the point that we want to make too. We certainly want you to be, yes, there's a level of discomfort that's going to be present there, but we certainly want you to be okay with whatever choice and decision you make. And exercising what that might look like will help you in understanding what you can do and what you'll be comfortable with doing on the front side of it.
Yeah, I love that practical application of it. And I just think it's really important to start visualizing what would I say? How would I handle this? And each time you'll refine it and make it your own. I love having a template. And it might be, I think we say it in there, it could be a combination of things, right? Like you might need to do the distract delay, but then you're going to be, delegating to somebody else. So it might be a combination of things too. So I think there's a lot of possibility to see yourself in those situations and think about how you could respond and what that could look like in a different way. If you always default to distract, what could that look like if you wanted to maybe be more direct or something like that? So now we're rounding out. So now we're looking into November and our final educational sharpening. And this one is on stay interviews. And I really love this concept because I think, veterinary medicine, veterinary professionals live in so many different areas, small practices, large practices, industry. I mean, just everywhere. But we're all one thing in common. We all work for an organization of some sort and size and shape. And so I think this is maybe something that people visualize as that's what really large organizations like, Silicon Valley, that's what they do. So can you kind of, Dr. Craig, talk to us about what is a stay interview even? Like what purpose does it serve? What is it? And is it this big unattainable goal for us?
No, it's honestly, it's one of those tools that is underutilized. We tend to focus on exit interviews to learn about why a person was unhappy. And what we know from exit interviews are people are not honest. And they're not honest for a couple of different reasons. One, I don't have to be honest with you. I'm on my way out. Two, there have been instances where I may have shared with you that I wasn't happy and you didn't seem to pick up on it. And then there are also those factors where people, they don't want to burn bridges, right? They don't want to burn bridges. And so I want to leave this in a good state, even though whatever my experience was, I don't want to bring it to light here. I just want to leave. If I ever decide to come back, or if I need a letter of recommendation from you, you'll be able to do that because I didn't leave a bad taste in your mouth. Stay interviews, meet people where they are. It's about these private individual meetings that an employee has with the person that they're reporting to. It is not conducted by HR. because typically exit interviews can be conducted by HR. They are not conducted by HR, and they are it's not the replacement for performance evaluations. They are not the same. A performance evaluation is a different conversation than a stay interview, and they should be separate. In a stay interview, this is about understanding more about your employee. Are they happy? Are they getting what they need? Do they feel valued? What are some things that are making them, what makes them love the job? All right. Have they ever thought about leaving? And if they did think about leaving, when was that time? Can they share when that was and what changed it for them? This is insight that you can only get if you ask the question. And if you don't ask the question, then all you can do is assume. And then those people will leave with those assumptions, and you'll never know how to address it. So a part of this is, one, it's just good change management, good leadership practices to have a pulse on where your staff are, all right, and try to figure out what are some things that we can do and shift to make sure that we're moving in the direction that you'd like us to move in. And then it's the other piece is about being honest. I don't think we're honest about what's happening. You've got staff that are waiting for things, but if you're not saying, like, this is where we are, we're moving slow, I'm trying here, and at least let them know that, they may be more receptive to that than saying, I'm going to get it done, and it's going to get done on this day, and then it never happens, and then the trust is gone, right? So it just really builds an opportunity for you to connect and build that bond with that employee. It maximizes your chances of retaining them, and not just retaining. It's about retention and thriving. You want to retain them, but you want them to be happy, and you want them to grow while they are being retained. And so that's what the stay interviews does. It asks those questions, and then you're able to get feedback from them. And then you can say, what are some things that I need to do in my succession planning, or in when opportunities are coming up? This person shared with me that they're interested in a leadership position. Now I can tap them because this is some feedback that they've already shared with you.
Yeah, that's really helpful in understanding just how much useful information you can gain from a stay interview. But I have to admit, I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I identified kind of two barriers in my mind to these in a vet practice. One is going to be the time to set aside to have these presumably one-on-ones. I guess you could do like a small group, but it's going to be a smaller subset of your employees to have these conversations. And then two, the same sort of barrier with the exit interviews of not wanting to ruffle feathers, or maybe not being completely honest with how things are going, because these are the people that you're currently working with still, right? So, Dr. Brandt, do you have an example in vet med of kind of how this can be implemented, and maybe how some of those barriers can be addressed?
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point that we have kind of this concept of what we want the stay interviews to be, but we don't necessarily always have the infrastructure to make that happen. I think back to one of the modules that we have in Journey for Teams. It's on psychological safety. If you're wanting to have a stay interview with a manager who's never ever asked you how things were going before, or did and then didn't do anything with the information, or became very defensive, then it doesn't really matter how we frame it. It's probably not going to be a really effective conversation. So know that these are effective when you already have trust and a pattern of behavior established. So that might be some homework that needs to happen before anything is ever implemented. And then there is also some strategy to stay interviews. So we think about low risk questions, which might sound like, and by the way, these may not be low risk for every employee. Yeah. But generally, when we ask, like, when you think about the things that you like most about your job, what are those? Or think about a day that you felt really motivated and enthusiastic. What do you think help make that possible? And so those might be things that people feel very comfortable addressing and engaging in. And then again, being really thoughtful about how you're listening to that information, and not trying to come back with a judgment of, well, that's why we can't do it, or that's never going to work. Like, again, you're hearing from their perspective. And if you're just starting these out, that might be where the stay interview ends, right? That might be what you achieve from it. Yeah. Over time, when there's that established relationship with trust and a pattern of the manager following through and addressing the information that is coming in and really capitalizing on it, then you can add what we consider kind of the higher risk questions, which might be, think about a time where you were really on the verge of leaving and what might have contributed to that. And then what are the biggest factors in what would cause you to stay? Or if there are things that you might change about the job, what would those be? By nature, we don't intend those to be more high risk questions, but the reality is that might be where some, what we call the uncomfortable truths come out. And for a manager, it may be hearing that some of what they're doing isn't landing in the way that's wanted. So we would develop that. And then I think it's really important to have a plan for how we're going to respond, to be honest about there are some things that you've raised that we're going to need to, reflect on. There may be some things that we cannot address, but be honest where you can, and then how you're going to do that, and have a meaningful plan to implement those, and then check in. Because otherwise, if you just feel like you're talking to the abyss, you're not going to engage in these. It'll feel like an exercise in futility. So it's really important to have that relationship and a plan to follow through on the information that you're getting.
That is such a great example. And it drives me right back to, I don't know if anyone on here is a Ted Lasso fan, but at the very beginning, when he first steps in, there's a lot of problems with the club and they do a little anonymous box. And one of the things that they say is, well, there's a lot of things they say that he can't fix, but the thing he can fix is the water pressure of the showers. And he doesn't say anything. He just fixes it. And that lays that solid foundation. And like you said, kind of a low risk. We've tackled this. Now we built the trust. We can go up to the next thing. Yeah. So I think that really shows how important this can be. And I'm just curious as we sort of wrap up here, because we're running short on time, but Dr. Craig, is that sort of what we can expect from the educational sharpening? Some more examples and things like that?
More examples, and then some questions. There is quite a few questions that you can start the conversation, and we have tips on setting the tone and how to implement that, the amount of time you should reserve, setting an agenda, how you let them know how to come and show up to the meeting. A lot of those tips are there. So we're giving sort of that setup and then some sample questions that you can use to start the conversation.
Yeah, that sounds great. And to the point about time restraints earlier, of having that template to work off of is so much easier than starting with a blank piece of paper and trying to design these things on your own. So that's really exciting. And Marcy, you mentioned this earlier, that while the modules or the sharpenings can be taken in any order, the skills do kind of build and accumulate. And I feel like, especially the ones that we've been talking about this week, being an upstander and having these stay interviews, these are very actionable. Like the being able to implement these in your workplace is going to make a noticeable difference. One, with the interviews, it's going to look different, right? There's going to be different meetings on the schedule, but I think the level of psychological safety that can be improved by having multiple bystanders on your team and having that culture of, upstanders on your team and having that culture of upstanding can be really powerful too. So this has been a great sneak preview for the fall of things to look forward to, and maybe to kind of prime the pump as we start our educational sharpenings that are out now. Fantastic. Well, thank you both, Dr. Craig and Dr. Brandt, for joining us in this 3-part episode series about Journey for Teams and what the next phase of this flagship DEI program for AVMA looks like.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you to each of you for joining us on this week's episode of My Veterinary Podcast as well. We love sharing this journey with you. And remember, we want to hear from you. So please leave us a ratings and review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen to. And you can also email us at mvlpodcast@avma.org. Take care, and we'll see you next time.